Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Gamecock Central Radio. Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell for a preview of the South Carolina-Florida game. We got a 12 noon kickoff tomorrow in Gainesville at the Swamp. Wes, we talked about this game earlier in the week, and we got a little bit more information available now as we are getting closer to kickoff. Florida saddled with injuries. Austin Appleby, their backup, will start tomorrow with the starter Luke Del Rio suffering a shoulder injury against Arkansas. Arkansas beat Florida 31-10 last week at Arkansas, and we talked about it earlier this week, Wes. Florida, entering a little bit of uncertain territory here. Huge game for both teams, Gamecocks and Gators. Both teams still in the hunt in the SEC East.
Yeah, that's a weird. It's weird for you to be able to say that sentence, Emerson. I don't think any of us, and I don't think even your most. We all got those friends. I think that are just, almost past the point of fanhood and just get unrealistic about it. I think even the most strong supporters of South Carolina wouldn't have thought, a few weeks ago that this was possible, them to still be in it in the East. But, they absolutely are. So, I think it makes it an exciting game. And I was thinking about this when the players talked about that on Tuesday, and I thought to myself, I said, it's been a while since South Carolina has been in a game that, truly has implications like this. Now, we all know it's a long shot, and let's be realistic. A lot of it is because the East is so down this year. But that doesn't change the fact that this is a very young South Carolina team that is going to get the chance to experience a game for the first time with some true implications. And, I think that's good for the future, because if you look ahead to what South Carolina is sort of building, there's a lot of people nationally that are now taking notice of what Muschamp is doing. And I think South Carolina is going to be sort of a dark horse next year for a lot of pundits as far as the East goes. So to me, this is a good opportunity for all these young guys to get to experience a game that really, truly matters, in a race. Because I think it kind of got to the point where for a stretch there were multiple games a year that South Carolina was playing that were national games. It was kind of fun to sort of prepare to cover a game that had national implications, and you almost took it for granted. I think the last one was probably that Texas A&M game to start the year when everything sort of started to fall apart, and I think this is a good step for the program. Win or lose, it'll be a good experience for all these young players.
First road start for Jake Bentley, the Gamecock starting quarterback, and also for Rico Dowdle, the Gamecock running back. Wes, let's talk about that. Gamecocks 3-0 with Bentley as the starter, but all three games were at Williams-Brice, so obviously a much more hostile environment for these young freshmen who have become such a big part of Gamecock football. Bentley making his first road start.
Yeah, I think, and we'll get to some more keys to victory later, but I think one of the keys is to start kind of fast, because the other thing, obviously they were at home, but the other thing that stands out about these three wins from Jake Bentley is that South Carolina has not trailed since Bentley became the starter. I'm pretty sure that's true. They've not had to play from behind, so it's either been tied or Carolina has been up. So I think as far as this goes, you're on the road, you're at the Swamp. We know the Swamp can get loud, but we also know this is a noon game. You almost always have late arriving crowds for noon games. I know the Swamp is not immune to that. They seem to have late arriving crowds a lot. And the fact is that even though he's only in his second year, and even though he won the SEC East last year, there's already a segment of this Florida fan base that isn't quite that happy with Jim McElwain. So I think there's an opportunity early in this game, if South Carolina can start fast, that you maybe can sort of mitigate the crowd a little bit. Now, we all saw, one of South Carolina's best teams of all time go down there and just get crushed back in 2012 because they got off to a terrible start, had a couple early fumbles. That was a Will Muschamp coach team on the other side. And, that was an outstanding team. Connor Shaw was the quarterback. Jadeveon Clowney was on that team. That was a team that had beaten Georgia, had went toe-to-toe with LSU. and they just got hammered at Florida because that crowd just sort of took over the game when they had something go wrong early on, what South Carolina did. So I think it's key for these young guys to sort of get off to a good start and just get into the flow of the game. And, the other side is Jake Bentley, to me, it's almost like the normal rules of true freshmen quarterbacks don't really apply to Jake Bentley. We've already seen him sort of get tested early on. Everybody said, well, before the UMass game, well, he did it in high school, but let's see what he can do in a real game. It's going to be different at college. And he was outstanding against UMass. Then everybody said, well, let's see what he does against a real SEC defense in Tennessee. And obviously he responded to that. And now he's responded with 2 straight good games against SEC competition. I think that as far as being on the road and all that stuff, Jake Bentley is up to the task. Now, the other part of that isn't just where the game is being played, it's that it's a pretty good defense, Emerson, and those, I thought one thing I picked up on that Muschamp said earlier this week that makes sense to me is those windows to throw through are going to be much tighter this week, and your quote-unquote 50-50 balls, which I think for South Carolina, with Brian Edwards and Deebo Samuel and Jake Bentley's ball placement, those 50-50 balls have been more like 75-25 balls, going in South Carolina's favor. But against this Florida secondary that, ironically, Muschamp and T-Rob basically helped build, he's going to have to be very careful with the football this week.
Wes, Florida's banged up. They've got as many as 4 starters that could miss this game tomorrow. Del Rio obviously is out with the shoulder injury, so it looks like Austin Appleby will get the start. And it could be that freshman Felipe Franks, it could be that Florida pulls the red shirt off of him and he gets some action in this game tomorrow. Again, noon kickoff on CBS for South Carolina and Florida. Let me give you the Florida injury report here. Their top 2 tacklers are out, 2 linebackers. Jared Davis and Alex Anzalone will miss this ball game. Anzalone suffered a broken arm against Arkansas. Starting center Cam Dillard has got a knee injury. Both those 2 are out for the season. And Davis has got badly sprained left ankle. Also for Florida, defensive end C.C. Jefferson's got a foot injury. He'll be a game-time decision. And starting receiver Tyree Cleveland, a freshman that's really come on this year, has got a leg injury. He's highly questionable, according to the Orlando Sentinel. So Florida really banged up right now, and we know that they're very athletic on defense, Wes, but you have to wonder what this defense is going to be like without their top 2 tacklers.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll be a little bit they're banged up, obviously. South Carolina pretty healthy. And I think another thing to watch, because let's be honest, this thing has so many storylines to it. You've got I was thinking about this the other day. You've got Will Muschamp coaching on the South Carolina sideline, and there's guys that he recruited and coached lining up for the other team, while Steve Spurrier will be there in Gator jacket, being honored for the 1991 SEC championship team. One of those teams is being honored at halftime anyway, or before the game. And so he's going to be down there being employed by Florida with many players that he recruited and coached on the other sideline. So there's so many storylines to this, but I think on the field, one way that storyline to me applies is that Muschamp is such a detail-oriented guy that not only is this Florida defense going to be, depleted, or at least, not at full strength, but Muschamp knows many of those Florida guys very, very well. He knows their strengths and he knows their weaknesses. To me, as far as there's a lot of off-the-field storylines to this, but on the field, how much does Muschamp's knowledge of that Florida defense play into this game as far as South Carolina's offensive game plan? Generally Muschamp is fairly hands-off with the offense. To me, it would make a lot of sense if he was pretty hands-on this week. So I'm curious to see if that sort of plays in to this whole thing. And it would be pretty ironic if Muschamp, who basically the biggest issue with his entire time at Florida was he never found his quarterback, if he, in year one, goes to Gainesville and wins with a freshman quarterback, then the Florida faithful to put it kindly, are not they're not going to be too happy, Emerson.
Gamecock Central Radio here. Emerson Phillips with Wes Mitchell. We hope you'll download the Gamecock Central Radio app. We've got a free phone app that allows you to listen to the GCR podcast on your phone anywhere you receive cell phone service. It is a free phone app, and it's available on the App Store and on Google Play. To subscribe to our podcast, search for Gamecock Central Radio. You'll find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and other popular services, or just visit radio.GamecockCentral.com. Wes, we've got so many storylines like you mentioned, and one of those is the fact that Will Muschamp lost his job at Florida 2 years ago when the Gators lost at home to the Gamecocks. So, that's something that Muschamp has been asked about this week, and it's got to be a bit of an awkward situation for him, but I think he's obviously very grateful to be back head coaching in the SEC, and he's grateful for the opportunity that he's gotten at South Carolina, and it's very interesting how quickly things have turned around. Muschamp's got the Gamecocks moving in the right direction with this 3-game win streak, and Florida, playing its final home game of the SEC slate here, still in opportunity, really in the driver's seat to win the SEC East, but the Gators, really banged up, and they got to be concerned about their injuries. So, very interesting matchup tomorrow. Steve Spurrier will be there. We talked about this earlier in the week. There's a lot going on tomorrow in Gainesville.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot going on off the field, a lot going on the field. And Muschamp has handled this whole thing with class, but he hasn't made that an issue in the locker room. But I get the impression his players maybe have made it a little bit of an issue because they want to go win one for their coach, I think. So, I think that's something that if you're a writer or radio, or if you've got the game on, if you're CBS, you got the game on TV. This thing has no shortage of things to talk about. So I think it's going to be a fun game. I think it's going to be a close game. Something we hadn't hit on, Emerson. Were you surprised to see the line open as high as it did? I think it opened at 15, right?
Yeah, I was surprised. I thought that was high, yes.
Because I think this is another sort of fourth quarter football game for South Carolina, and I think it ultimately comes down to the play on the lines of scrimmage. I think if South Carolina can hold par on the lines of scrimmage, then he might be a freshman, his first road start, but I think Jake Bentley is the difference for South Carolina. If you look at Florida, they've struggled at quarterback even before the injury. I think the scheme probably will not change much. South Carolina will have to make a few adjustments, I'm sure, to whatever they're doing, but the scheme isn't going to totally change with the new quarterback. They sort of do what they do on offense, and I think if South Carolina can create some running room on their side and keep Florida's going to have some success running the ball, but just keep them from completely taking over the game and force them to throw, then it really sets up nicely for South Carolina to have a shot at the upset on Saturday morning.
All right, Florida ran 12 times for just 14 yards in that loss to Arkansas last Saturday. Offensively, they've struggled at times this year, and they're going to be starting a second string or a backup at quarterback tomorrow, with Appleby getting the nod and a possibility that freshman Felipe Franks could play some as well. And on the other side of the football, West, Florida's been known for its defense, but Arkansas ran for 233 yards against the Gators last Saturday. So, tomorrow's a new day, a new game. Florida playing at home. It's the final home game for all of their seniors. It's senior day, and they're going to recognize a former Gator championship team as well, so an important day for them. Maybe playing at home gets them amped up to play, but I think Jake Bentley and the Gamecock offense will be able to move the football, and I think this is going to be a tight game that will probably be settled in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, it should be fun, man. Whoever makes those plays, I think you can always say for these type games, whoever makes those plays at the end is going to come out as the winner. All
right, Florida 6-2, and they are 4-2 in the conference. They still got to play at LSU to wrap up SEC play. The Gamecocks are 5-4 and 3-4 in the SEC. So this is the final SEC game of the 2016 season for the Gamecocks. But South Carolina still mathematically alive to win the SEC East. Wes, let's talk about that real quick before we wrap it up. For South Carolina to win the SEC East, the Gamecocks have to win at Florida tomorrow. They're going to have Tennessee beat Kentucky. They're going to have Auburn beat Georgia. Both those games are tomorrow. And then South Carolina will also need Tennessee to lose to either Missouri or Vanderbilt to wrap up the regular year. In fact, mathematically, Tennessee is still the favorite to win the SEC East, with Florida right behind them. Florida can win the East if they win the last two games. Obviously, they control their destiny. But if the Gamecocks beat the Gators, Wes, I think there's a good chance that Auburn wins at Georgia. Auburn's about a 9-point favorite, and Tennessee about a 13-point favorite over Kentucky tomorrow. So if the Gamecocks can take care of business at Florida, South Carolina then becomes, a fan of Missouri and Vanderbilt, needing them to beat Tennessee in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think when you look at those scenarios, probably Missouri or Vandy beating Tennessee is the least likely out of any of that. Now,
right.
Now you got two shots at it because it only has to be one of them. It doesn't have to be both of them. So, but I still think, it's a difficult proposition. But, hey, if you're South Carolina, I think you're just, at this point in the rebuild, you're kind of just happy to be in the conversation. Like I said to start, I think that's good for these players to experience that. And I think they've got a good approach to this because out of all those things we just mentioned, the first thing we said is South Carolina has to beat Florida. So if you're South Carolina, there's really no point in putting any other focus on anything else until you've done number one. And South Carolina's got that opportunity. As far as the first thing on that list, they kind of control their own destiny. And then you do that, and then you just sit back and watch and hope for the best. But I think, even if South Carolina doesn't win the East, so much more that can be accomplished this Saturday. I mean, 4-4 in the SEC. They won one game in the SEC last year. They beat Vanderbilt. They would be bowl eligible at this point with a great shot of getting to 7 wins next week against Western Carolina. And that would give South Carolina wins this year over Tennessee and Florida, which are 2 of the 3 teams that I think when you look at the East, you always say you're sort of chasing Tennessee, Florida, Georgia. So as far as building a program, that's recruiting in. So to me, whether they go to, win the East or not, that'd be a great story, even though the East is way, way down. But this game, there's so much that South Carolina can accomplish on Saturday, and I think they got a good shot at it. And you know what? It would be another. I think South Carolina delivered a blow to Tennessee with that loss. And I think if they can beat Florida, I think they can deliver a big blow to Jim McElwain as well, and the level of the support he has in Florida. So lots on the line for South Carolina. I think it's one of those things. If South Carolina loses the game and plays well, people would just be like, oh, they were a double-digit underdog. They weren't expected to win. But if they win this one after what's happened the last 3 weeks, then all of a sudden momentum is through the roof.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the Gamecocks respond. First road game for Jake Bentley and Rico Dowdle as starters for this Gamecock football team that has won 3 in a row. And, all 3 of the wins came at home, so we're going to continue to learn more about this young Carolina football team tomorrow. Noon kick, Gamecocks and Gators. Should be fun. It'll be on CBS. Wes, thanks for your time today. We appreciate the update.
All right, thanks, man. I'll talk to you soon.
That's Wes Mitchell, and I'm Emerson Phillips, and this is Gamecock Central Radio. Back with a report on South Carolina and Florida next week here on Gamecock Central Radio.